An irate prisoner is being held in a U.S. jail. He was furious after spending 10 years in jail. He and his brother took a large quantity of money 10 years ago, but only recently did a bunch of them come home. Broke into the home and stole all the cash as well as in front of his brother. Today was the day he was freed from jail after being brutally murdered. He discovered the sports automobile that the trustees had prepared, looked at the information on his adversaries, pulled a gun from beneath the seat, then kicked his adversaries in the face. He entered a business and went right to the picture of the guy wearing glasses, discovered the first opponent, fired without hesitation, and killed them. The information was obtained from the other adversaries by the hired private investigator. He went back to the vehicle and continued to browse the pictures in search of the next target for retaliation. A murderer was hired to kill a person by a mystery phone call. Johnson is the intended victim. It seems that Johnson's retaliation has already alerted his adversary. The assassin instantly begins to get ready, pulling out bogus identification and placing a fake license plates on his sports vehicle and pulling out a briefcase full of weapons of every kind. Johnson showed there in his automobile as planned, and the elderly guy in front of him was Johnson's. This time, a target is a complete pervert who specializes in kidnapping girls in the pool while giving them drugs. Every time, the camera was also utilized to document the crime's progression. Johnson immediately kicked open the room's door. The elderly guy attempted to oppose Johnson by picking up the scissors, was fired through his hand's palm. The elderly guy pled desperately, but this retaliation must be paid for. Johnson was preparing to depart when the assailant snuck up behind him. Fortunately, a young girl who had just emerged from the entrance stepped in between them, and the murderer paused briefly. Johnson pulled his gun as soon as he realized he could shove the girl back into the room. A big caliber pistol was drawn, shot, and struck the murderer cleanly. He quickly dashed into the hallway after calming down to see Johnson driving up. He drove off in his sports automobile. The police promptly responded to the 2 consecutive gunshots after seeing the original brother. Johnson's identity was discovered by the police using security footage. Despite being pronounced dead, he unexpectedly returned back to life. He was able to live again since the bullet entered his skull and exited through his cheek. Johnson went to a pub the same night and sought for his next foe. After using the restroom, Jack was washing his hands when a powerful guy suddenly approached back of him. He was furious when he saw his foe was there in front of him. Jack ruthlessly murdered his brother in front of him 10 years ago. The 2 guys got into a life-or-death struggle. However, Jack had lost ground after only the first round. Jack begged Johnson to let his family know that he was dying, so Johnson gave his opponent no chance. Go and inform Johnson that he was just being compensated for doing his job. He then gently closed his eyes after finishing that. Johnson drove onto the road after tending to Jack, continuing to look for the remaining enemies of his. Johnson turned around right away and headed directly for the hospital. However, the sheriff also learned that Jack was alive, which surprised him since he had believed he was dead. Johnson arrived to the medical facility and used the directional sign to locate the surgical room. Johnson quickly pushed in the door, pulled out a revolver, and made sure Jack didn't really pass away. Shot. The sheriff was instantly concerned by the sound of shooting and rushed to the operating. Johnson has vanished into thin air from the room. The sheriff followed the nurse's advice and went downstairs in silence. Johnson, followed by a sneaky shot from behind. Johnson responded swiftly, pulling a revolver. Johnson fired to smash the electrical box as he hurried to conceal behind a wall. Allowed the sheriff to become temporarily blind, so the sheriff carefully checked, but the rifle was pointed at. Sheriff lowered his gun and knelt down gradually. As he did, he saw the badge on his waist and ultimately decided to release him. He started the automobile and rapidly drove away, only being observed by the assassins from a great height. The two guys avoided each other on the highway and started running for their lives. Johnson made the decision to take the chance as the vehicle flew by in order to entirely lose the murderer. Bye. Johnson had lifted his rifle to aim at the murderer, but he did not want to merely kill, so he blasted. The murderer took advantage of the opening to fire, striking Johnson's neck. Quickly depart via car. Johnson treated his wounds and then hurried back to his mother's house. Brother's ashes, the fires of vengeance stoking once more. He watched his brother being brutally killed 10 years ago due to a betrayal, and as a result, he was also imprisoned, recently finished serving a 10-year term, and in a matter of days, committed murder. 3 adversaries. Johnson once again eyed his brother's remains as they traveled to confront their last foe. He arrived by car for a sermon, and the instant the pastor entered the tent, his face became silent. Instantly. Even though it was just 10 years ago that he was in charge of informing others, his heart has been devastated by Johnson's brother's sad death. He decided to reinvent himself as a priest as a result. He believed that by doing this, he may win God's pardon. He begged for Johnson's pardon. Johnson took out a gun and pointed it at his head, but Johnson ultimately decided not to shoot. He turned to depart after letting the pastor return to his family. The murderer saw the whole thing. The pastor was Johnson's last target, according to the police's investigation. And the sheriff arrived at the preaching right away. Johnson, who felt some internal relief, glanced at the picture of himself and his brother. Anger also vanished. The murderer then materialized in front of him holding a pistol and scanning Johnson's list. You still have a major adversary in terms of retaliation, the murderer mockingly reminded Johnson. He not only paid me to murder you, but he also arranged the whole incident. The sheriff arrived in time. The murderer was forced to lay down his gun. The sheriff nevertheless immediately fired at Johnson. It comes out that the treachery was planned by the sheriff. 10 years ago, he believed that everything was going well, but he did not anticipate Johnson to not only did not pass away, but 10 years later started to get retribution. He therefore hired a murderer in secret to murder Johnson, but the killer has repeatedly failed. He had to decide to commit the crime himself. Johnson would not budge, and they both exited the area at the same time. While on the phone by the riverbank, the sheriff managed to solve the major issue that was on his mind. Johnson had fired a gun at him from behind. Incredulously, Johnson's bullet was filled with assistance from the doctor who inserted a piece of high-strength metal. It seems like everything is arranged in its own way. Johnson ultimately exacted the ultimate retribution by scattering his brother's ashes into the river. Due to the release's hostility. On the journey, he reclaimed his life and began the new chapter. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.